So what's interesting about this cancel culture is the question of who is behind it. It's the swarm. It's the Twitter mob. It's the crazy, angry mob. So what happens is the swarm comes, and then the object of the swarm's ire loses their job. How does it happen? Who is to blame? Specifically, journalists, quote-unquote journalists. They are. I'm not going to say it's just everybody and everyone is all to blame. No, it is very practically the journalists, so-called, and the mainstream media who are driving this. Because journalists, from your one independent reporter on Twitter all the way up to the New York Times, they are not reporting newsworthy stories. They are simply dredging up character assassination. And all you have to do is look at yesterday's news cycle. The New York Times ran, front page, big cover story, completely unsubstantiated allegations. They hid evidence that was exculpatory. They hid the fact that the people alleging crimes against Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court justice, weren't actually alleging anything. It was people alleging crimes about people who were alleging things who didn't actually allege them. It was bogus character assassination. That's the New York Times, the gray lady, all the news that's fit to print. Same thing is true of the Washington Post. Same thing is true throughout the mainstream media, all the way down to so-called independent journalists or independent outlets. So it is those guys. They are doing worse. Right now. It wasn't always this way. It's been better before. Just remember, when FDR was president, the journalists didn't report on the fact that FDR was bound to a wheelchair. The president of the United States, cameras on him all the time. A lot of people didn't know he was in a wheelchair. The journalists didn't report on FDR's mistresses. They didn't report on JFK's mistresses. They didn't report on LBJ's mistresses. Now, those guys all have two things in common. One, they are simply known by 3 letters. An acronym, and 2, they're all Democrats. So maybe that has something to do with it, but regardless, it was a time when journalists exhibited discretion. Frankly, all those mistresses were certainly more newsworthy than this cancel culture. Some guy sent 3 tweets 10 years ago, and now you got to ruin his life. This is being driven by the journalists. They deserve our scorn. When Trump goes out and says they're the enemy of the people, he's half right. He's also half wrong. Why is that? Because what are the journalists responding to? They're responding to you and me. We'll get to that in a second. First, how did this happen? The way that this cancel culture thing occurred with Shane Gillis is, first, an independent journalist, which means a guy with a Twitter account, named Seth Simons, came out, dredged up a bunch of old clips of the comedian telling jokes, and then framed it in a way that this was supposed to be some horrible offense, and then Saturday Night Live and NBC ran scared and fired the guy they just hired. That the New York Times picked up this story, those scum-sucking bottom feeders at the New York Times, they blew the whole story up and the guy loses his job. What did they find? Here's what they found. Apparently a year or 2 ago, the comedian, Shane Gillis, the comedian, I'll note, made some jokes. Here is one joke about going to Chinatown.
It's a dishonest food, dude. There's nothing to it. It's shitty meat, a chemical they made up to fuck your body up, and neuters.
The neuters are
cheapest thing in the world.
We got
chemical.
Sick.
Worst meat you can find.
We got in there and we sat down, and baby girl was like, "I'm so excited for neuters," and I was like, "Yo, chill." But we had in the translation between you and the waiter.
Yeah,
it's just such a hassle. It's like, I'm pointing at it. Like, this is the neuter.
Well, that's why I put number for like 57.
The joke is that Chinese people have different accents from English-speaking people. That's the joke. And it's true. It's like the most obvious joke in the world. I'm not saying it's a good joke, but it's an obvious joke. It's a completely harmless joke. The joke is that stereotypically, East Asians mix up the L and the R sounds in English. So he says neuters instead of noodles. But that's true. That is true. Those 2 letters do get confused. Absolutely harmless joke. Less offensive than making a joke about Irish people drinking. I mean, so obvious. It's a joke about language. He should lose his job for that. As he says, I go to Chinatown and sometimes the people speak with funny accents. They do. That's right. Of course, that's what happens. Here's Seth Simons' next example of Shane Gillis's terrible, awful racism from the same podcast, from the same conversation about Chinese restaurants.
It's funny too, because that's more annoying than any other minority playing music at a restaurant, loud on their phone.
Do you think an Asian
trying to learn English bothers me more than someone listening to like Lil Uzi Vert while I'm trying to eat dinner.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, nice racism.
That's nice
Good
racism. That's good racism.
I love to racist.
It's basically the stereotype of white people that we walk around all day and are like,
yeah, that's what happens.
But it's funny too that like
if you were over there, it'd be they'd be the white people being like, shut up.
Now, what's incredible about this clip, and actually, I guess the last clip too, is not only are the jokes not an example of racism, whatever that means anymore, because racism has been defined down to nothing by the left, they're actually jokes about racism. The object of the joke is the racism. In the first clip, he says neuters, and he uses this sort of stereotypical and ostensibly offensive pronunciation. And then he says, that was a good racism. He's admitting, he's saying, that was racist what I said. I shouldn't say that. That's bad to say that. And then in the second clip, I mean, even he says to his girlfriend, because she said the word neuters, and he said, oh, stop it, chill, be cool, because he knows you're not supposed to say that. And the joke is that incongruity, how you're supposed to behave and how you're actually behaving. And they talk about it in the second clip. They say, yeah, this is sort of what ethnic minorities must imagine white people are doing all the time, complaining about minorities. But I guess if we were in China and we were speaking the way that we speak, they would probably say the same things about us. So that is a joke about race, specifically a joke about racism. He's got to lose his job for that. Of course he does, because Seth Simons, this random Twitter account, wants to ruin someone's life. He wakes up in the morning, he says, well, I'm going to ruin someone's life today. I don't know what's going on in my life, but I've got such an empty pit in my own life, in my own soul, that I'm going to fill that today by destroying somebody's life. And so he pulls the whole narrative together that this comedian Shane Gillis, I guess, hates Chinese people or something, by finding a different Chinese joke from a different podcast that he told. The podcast has a bunch of guys on it, and Shane has the audacity to joke that the Chinese have a lot of abortions. Here's the joke.
Shout out to NYC Grappling Club, grapplingclub@nyc.com. They've been hooking me up.
You're speaking like him now? Thank you, Grappling Club.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. You've taught me many valuable lessons, not just about fighting, but the mental game as well.
I can't tell if you mean Asian or handicapped.
Both.
Lewis's training.
I have not seen an Asian handicapped person.
Asian.
Can't tell.
They put him down early.
That was the joke. Did you catch the joke at the end? So they're all telling the same joke about the L's and the R's, which every comedian and virtually everyone else has told at some point. And then someone says, I can't tell if you're handicapped or Chinese. The joke being, I can't tell if you are speaking English poorly because it's not your first language, or if you're speaking English poorly because you have mental deficiency. Isn't it really funny to explain jokes? And then they say, well, I've never seen a handicapped Chinese person. They put them down earlier than that. This is a dark joke, very dark humor. Specifically, it's a joke about abortion. It is a joke playing on a fact that is obviously true, which is that China very famously had a policy of compulsory abortion for over 35 years. And that policy was called the one-child policy. The joke is they kill their babies as a government policy, which is true. Doesn't make it nice, doesn't make it a nice fact about life, but it is true. And what comedy does is it subverts all these sorts of awful things, like coercive government, or like mandatory abortion, or like cultural mores. That's what it is doing. Now the crowning achievement of this guy's career, this comedian Shane Gillis, ruined. It's gone. You can't have it because of some jerk named Seth Simons. If you enjoyed this video, and frankly, even if you didn't, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and share it with all of your friends.